Hello everyone! Thanks for coming back to hear what else I saw last month. Movie number 1 is 1956's Lisbon. Ray Milland, who also produced and directed, stars as a smuggler offered a huge chunk of money to sneak a rich man out of prison and into Lisbon. Maureen O'Hara plays the man's ravishing wife, who can't make up her mind about her end of the deal. This movie's one of those vibrant, exotic jaunts that makes you wonder what came first, the screenplay or the desire to go on a paid Mediterranean vacation. It's got an international cast, although nobody is playing their own nationality. Ray Milland, Welsh, is playing an American. Maureen O'Hara, Irish, is playing an American. Claude Rains, English, is playing a Greek. The only main Portuguese characters are played by Yvonne Furneaux, French, and Francis Lederer, a naturalized American born in Prague. Maybe the extras were actually Portuguese. I don't say this as a criticism. It's honestly something that I tend to expect from movies like this from this time. It's just a funny thing I noticed. Claude Rains' diabolical introduction lets you know exactly what kind of man he is, and as you might expect, he plays his wicked character with gusto. He's a mischievous sadist with expensive tastes and a strange household where beautiful women lounge around and get rewarded for kicking the butler. Okay. I wish I could say Milland plays the heroic antithesis, but all the characters here are morally ambiguous. He's as questionable as the rest, especially when a beautiful woman throws herself into his arms, which happens with some frequency. The film's a little too big for its britches, adopting an air of grandeur that doesn't really suit what the script has to offer, but it is an attractive film to look at, and in one scene, Milland makes excellent use of a flare gun. Movie number 2 is 1952's Home at 7, also known as Murder on Monday. Ralph Richardson plays a humble banker who returns from work as usual to be greeted by his distraught wife. According to her, he's been missing for the last 24 hours, and his horror doubles when he realizes his apparent memory lapse coincides with a crime in the neighborhood. Richardson, who had starred in the original West End production of the play, gives a compelling, quietly desperate performance. He also directed this film with his real-life wife Mariel Forbes, likewise reprising her smaller stage role. I don't know if production was an unpleasant experience, but it did end up being his only directorial effort. Margaret Leighton co-stars as the banker's wife, with Jack Hawkins as a sympathetic doctor, and they give fine performances too, growing troubled as this simple, routine-oriented man is unable to account for himself and the net draws tighter. It is a dialogue-heavy film, betraying its theatrical origins. Scenes are long, and the storytelling is fairly straightforward. I've seen several classic amnesia crime dramas and suspensors now, and I was looking forward to seeing what new things this might bring to the table, but from a technical standpoint, it doesn't pull many tricks. Still, even if it advances somewhat slowly with a bit of repetition, it's an entertaining and engrossing story. Movie number 3 isn't really a movie. My mom and I watched the 1995 Pride and Prejudice miniseries again. I'm surprised. According to my records, this was my first time since I reviewed it a few years ago. But if you've seen that video, you'll know I've watched this dozens of times in my life. For me, for us, it is, and always will be, the gold standard adaptation of Jane Austen's classic novel. I could go on and on extolling its virtues and listing the many things I find delightful, but in the interest of saving time, I'll say instead that if you want to know more of my thoughts on it, you should watch that video. It's not all-inclusive either, but I did say a lot, and I'm pretty sure the feelings I expressed then haven't changed. Movie number 4 is 1977's Islands in the Stream, which has no connection with the Dolly Parton-Kenny Rogers song. It's a war-adjacent story set in the Bahamas, 1940. George C. Scott stars as a metal sculptor whose estranged sons come to visit, while German naval activity draws closer to the island. It's based on a story or stories by Ernest Hemingway. It's got many of his trademarks, and I'm sure it's no accident that Scott is made up to resemble him. Certain details in the film mirror Hemingway's own life, making me wonder what was part of the source material and what did the screenwriters add to give the script greater significance. This is a much warmer, gentler version of George C. Scott than I tend to think of. I've learned that he did not always play gruff, severe men, and I've seen several films where he shows a softer side. It's just that the gruff, severe persona is what I always think of first, and so it's nice to see the opposite, and I could even accept this being considered a Father's Day movie. Its narrative is told in segments, but it doesn't feel disjointed, except perhaps in mood. There is a turning point. Through the first half, I was often expecting something bad to happen around every corner, and I was pleasantly surprised at how heartwarming and touching it was. It's not quite so warm and fuzzy in the second half, which didn't hurt the film, but my enjoyment was diminished somewhat, even as I shrugged and said, "That's Hemingway." It's still a good movie, though at times it was kind of a downer, and it had a nice Jerry Goldsmith score. Movie number 5 is 1980's Somewhere in Time. Christopher Reeve stars as a playwright who becomes so taken with the portrait of a famous actress from 1912 that he wills himself into the past so he can meet her. Jane Seymour co-stars in this time travel romance, which was adapted by Richard Matheson from his own novel, Bid-Time Return. This was quite a departure for the writer, most known for his science fiction and horror works. This came out the same year as Superman 2, and Reeves' performance combines the boyish charm and dorky exuberance of Clark Kent with the manly strength and daring of Superman. As for Seymour, she looks sublime, the very picture of a demure Edwardian lady. Everything about her is soft, her expression, her hair, her voice. The music by John Barry, of course, is very appealing, particularly the emotional strains of the predominant theme, which is usually credited as "We're Losing Him." I have always listed Barry's score for Out of Africa as one of my favorite soundtracks, and this theme is kind of like its musical cousin. Besides Barry's music, the film also features the 18th variation from Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. You can't go wrong with that! I also enjoyed the little subplot with Arthur, the senior bellhop who Reeve encounters again as a boy. Those moments between them were very sweet. Unfortunately, much as I hoped to embrace this movie, it didn't do it for me. I wasn't swept away by the romance, and I found the relationship wanting. It's not the fault of the actors, who play their roles well. There was a lack of a certain kind of substance. But more importantly, there were too many things that put me off that I couldn't look past, like Reeves' character developing this unhealthy fixation with a dead woman's picture, and becoming so obsessed that he must track her down in the past. And there's the logistics of how he manages time travel through sheer brain power. That's kind of ridiculous, but I could accept that. My issue is the way he pursues her and the way he persists, even though she's wary of him and spooked by him, with good reason. If I were her and there was this guy who just shows up out of nowhere and he's being kind of weird and he approaches and then he's following me and he's saying strange cryptic things and then he keeps popping up and trying to get to me and I'm kind of freaked out by him, I would not find that appealing. That is creepy. It's creepy in real life, it's creepy online, and it's creepy in a movie. I'm just too realistic, I guess, to suppress that response for the sake of the entertainment. Christopher Plummer co-stars as Seymour's domineering manager, giving some depth to a part that might otherwise have been stereotypical. I know he's supposed to be the bad guy. Yeah, there were times where it's like, he's a jerk. But there were a few times when he'd voice his objections, and I'd be like, he's right! Please don't come after me, Somewhere in Time fans. It's a very pretty movie. Movie number 6 is 1952's Fort Osage, a B-Western in which a wagon train to California is delayed by rumors of trouble with the Osage over a broken treaty. I came across this on YouTube and added it to my watch list, but I did so under the impression it was a film called Warpath from 1951, starring Edmund O'Brien and Dean Jagger. Well, the upload conveniently left out the opening titles, so I had no idea this was an entirely different movie, and I spent at least 20 minutes wondering why Edmund O'Brien was taking so long to show up. Therefore, watching this was a confusing and disappointing experience, and then I was further irritated to find out several people in the comments have told the uploader that he's mislabeled the movie and used the wrong poster in the thumbnail. But has he changed it? Nope! I try not to look at the comments on movie uploads because, well, people just can't help themselves. There's often someone who just says a little too much or just outright spoils the ending. Good for them. So I did not take a gander at the comments before I watched the movie. It's too bad there isn't some feature on YouTube where you could not look at the comments, but look at this other little number that would tell you, hey, people are displeased with this video. There's something here that put people off, that made people mad, that made them say, hey, I dislike this. Yeah, YouTube, I'm looking at you. This is a prime example of a video where the dislike button would have come in handy, would have saved me some time, would have saved me some frustration. Fort Osage wasn't a bad movie, by the way. It wasn't especially good, but it was a tolerable hour's worth of entertainment. Movie number 7 is 1959's Face of Fire, a turn-of-the-century film in which a beloved handyman rescues the local doctor's son from a house fire and suffers severe burns and brain damage. The townsfolk, repelled by his grotesque appearance and altered behavior, demand he be put away or put down, but the indebted doctor strives to help him. This was based on a story by Stephen Crane, author of The Red Badge of Courage. I don't remember how it got there, but this was on my watch list, and I went into it thinking it was a Western revenge tale, which it's not. That was my mistake. What it is a tense, people are awful drama. It's kind of like Of Mice and Men meets The Phantom of the Opera, but then again, I don't want to oversimplify it. The cast is excellent, though James Whitmore's handyman doesn't get to show his face much, and I was very impressed with Cameron Mitchell's sensitive turn as the Doctor. I've never seen him in a role like this. It's not the kind of thing people associate him with, but I think he reveals some underrated dramatic chops. The supporting actors make an impression too, including Royal Dano and Lois Maxwell and young Miko Oscaard as the Doctor's conflicted son. Another thing that impressed me was how nice this movie looks. From the freshness of the exterior shots to the subtle artistic touches and cleverness with lighting, blocking, set dressing, etc. This, plus the fine performances, raises the quality of the film to another level. I really liked it. Movie number 8 is the 1994 TV adaptation of Thomas Hardy's The Return of the Native, which I have not read. Catherine Zeta-Jones plays Eustasia Vi, the beautiful but dissatisfied resident of a rustic village who longs to flee to more sophisticated society. She uses her beauty and allure to wrap the males in the community around her finger, drawing the superstitious ire of the local women. I don't know if this 100-minute adaptation is faithful to the novel or not, but it sure lines up with other works by the author. This had Thomas Hardy written all over it. And as I see it, that's a good thing, and a not-so-good thing. Hardy's writing is excellent, it's beautiful, his use of nature and the weather is amazing, but the stories themselves I often find frustrating and miserable. And though I knew nothing about this plot going in, The setting, story, themes, and characters felt very familiar. I really didn't find any of the characters appealing, except the man with the red face, who was by far the most decent and sensible person. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, and I didn't understand what it was they kept calling him. This is one of those things where those of you who have read the book can say, well, you should have read the book first, then you'd know! Should I read the book? Is the book good? I read, well, anyway, that's a tangent. We don't need to go on a Thomas Hardy tangent. The actors do play their parts well, and it was fun to see Catherine Zeta-Jones and Clive Owen before they got famous. She is lovely, but cunning and selfish, and he's, so smarmy. Ray Stevenson plays the titular native, a respected gentleman who gets pulled into a love triangle and suffers for it, while Joan Plowright plays his troubled mother. I wouldn't say I disliked the film, despite the impression you might be forming from my words and my tone here. It was just one of those, oh boy, here we go, I can hear the sound of inevitability experiences. And I do kind of hate plots that revolve around a manipulative woman playing her swains off each other. Without spoiling it, I will say I was satisfied in the end, so thank you for that, Mr. Hardy. Movie number 9 is 2005's The World's Fastest Indian. It's based on a true story, Anthony Hopkins starring as Burt Munro, a New Zealander in the 60s who sets his heart on traveling to the US with his old motorcycle to participate in Speed Week, hoping to break a world record. My parents and I really liked this one. Hopkins is great, of course he is, full of energy and embodying a casual, can-do attitude. I can't testify to the accuracy of his Kiwi accent, but I thought he did pretty well with it. This is a motorcycle film, but for the most part it's more about the journey than the destination, the struggle to accomplish the goal rather than the goal itself. Along the way, Munro has brief encounters with one person after another, and I must confess I watched the film with some apprehension, concerned that each newcomer might be someone who would try to take advantage of him. I don't know if that says something about me or the world, but this is a lighthearted film. His relationship with the boy next door is sweet, and his encounters with these strangers are amusing, his easygoing temperament helping him out of many a jam. And with his calm refusal to let any setback discourage him, Munro serves as an inspiration to young and old, and everyone in between. Movie number 10 is 1989's Always. Richard Dreyfuss stars as a pilot who fights forest fires, his daredevil antics putting a strain on his relationship with his girlfriend, played by Holly Hunter. When he's killed on a mission, saving his buddy John Goodman's life, he finds himself sent back in spirit form to guide another younger pilot, who happens to have fallen for Hunter. This fantasy romance, directed by Steven Spielberg, is a modernized remake of 1943's A Guy Named Joe, starring Spencer Tracy, which I haven't seen yet. Romance and Steven Spielberg are not really two things I put together, as he tends to eschew lovey-dovey stuff in his films. In some cases, it's almost like he's allergic to it. So I was curious how this would be. It took me a while to warm up to the characters and their sense of humor. Seemed like they were being a little too silly and irresponsible for the situation, but maybe that's because I had California on my mind. But once I did, I enjoyed the witty repartee, the jokes, the bad impressions. The film excels, however, in its most deeply felt moments, the expressions of love and grief, regret and jealousy. Both Dreyfuss and Hunter carry these scenes, maintaining the story's emotional core. As a supernatural guide, Audrey Hepburn makes a special appearance, her last role on film, and she has as much grace and warmth as she ever did. Brad Johnson plays the other guy, who seems kind of derpy until you get to know him better. I would rather they hadn't included that he laughs like Dreyfuss and pulls his eyebrows like him, because I find that kind of weird, like it insinuates that her interest is sparked just because she recognizes these familiar traits and bad habits. I don't like it when romances go for that so uncanny concept. A restrained John Williams score takes a back seat to the main couple's song. Given the title of the film, I predicted that if there was a song at all, it might be Always, the Irving Berlin tune. But thematically, the beautifully complex poetic ballad Smoke Gets in Your Eyes is a better choice. Interesting that in 1 month I watched 2 fantastical romances that deal in some way with death. That's not really my thing. For what it's worth, I liked this better than Somewhere in Time, for various reasons, but each film has its own merits. Number 11 is a 1970 TV movie, The Love War. Lloyd Bridges plays an undercover alien engaged in a war on Earth with another alien race when an encounter with Angie Dickinson causes an internal conflict. There were a couple things here that seemed to have been lifted right out of The Invaders TV show, which had gone off the air just a couple years prior. Was it an intentional ripoff? I don't know. I like to give it the benefit of the doubt and say no, that it was just a coincidence. And then it occurred to me that the assignation with the enemy set for a certain time and place in the middle of nowhere made this like a galactic gunfight at the OK Corral. And then there was a climactic shootout in a western ghost town, and I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea how right I was. It's a simple film, not many characters, not a lot to the story. There's an action sequence that seems kind of silly because of how limited it is. Bridges and Dickinson aren't a super convincing couple, but there's an excuse for that. And the film was interesting until it wasn't. That's not entirely the movie's fault. It turns out, I hesitate to even say this, but it turns out, many months ago when I first looked this up, the one-sentence description I read gave away the ending. Well, it didn't give away the ending, but it revealed the film's twist. I didn't know that was a spoiler, and time passed, and I thought I'd forgotten what I'd read, but it must have stuck with me somehow, subconsciously, because I predicted the twist long before it came. Moral of the story, if you want to watch this movie, don't read anything about it. Movie number 12 is not really a movie, it's the 1957 recording of Cinderella, a version of the Rodgers and Hammerstein stage musical they adapted for live television, starring Julie Andrews in the titular role. The original enormously successful color broadcast of this is sadly lost, but someone discovered this black and white dress rehearsal tape, and while it's not the best quality, it's pretty good, and they released it, someone uploaded it to YouTube, and later generations are able to partake of this musical theater treat. It's impossible not to smile while watching this. It's Julie Andrews, for goodness sake, and the rest of the cast is a delight as well. The hilarious stepsisters, the king and queen, John Cypher as the kindly prince, Edie Adams as the vivacious fairy godmother. I always have a hard time picking my favorite number from this show because there really aren't any bad ones in the bunch. And while the transformation effects leave everything to the imagination, and the ballroom set is tiny, the music and the people combined make this a magical watch. And that wraps up this collection of reviews. I hope you enjoyed the video. You can find the titles I mentioned and how I watched them in the description. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching. Bye! Oh my goodness. Bye!